Hi there, gallery members and new viewers alike. Thanks for tuning in for this latest edition of Gridiron Gallery. If you haven't seen my channel before up until this point with new videos, recommend you like this one and subscribe for more. We got plenty of content on all your favorite football leagues. And for those gallery members out there, thank you as always for tuning in. Really can't appreciate you enough. Now, on to the show. Joining me today on the Gridiron Gallery podcast, I have special guest Ben Fischer. He is from the Sports Business Journal. He is a staff writer and pro football beat reporter for the Sports Business Journal. He joins me today as we are discussing kind of really just some details that came out as of the day previous to us recording right now about the USFL really announcing its execs and giving us a bunch of details. You were kind of the first to jump ahead of this before they dropped their official PR on this whole thing. Ben, what can you tell us about this, at least in terms of say the executive board? It's pretty stacked with mostly, it feels like Fox people in particular. They just took a bunch of guys from their personnel and made it their chair of the board, and the board in particular, with Brian being surrounded by it.
Right. I think that, aside from the specifics in the release, what was most notable here is that Fox Sports has a much stronger role in this than we had initially been led to believe they would. I think in June, when they announced that they were reviving the USFL, honestly, in both cases, it hasn't been entirely clear. They haven't answered a lot of follow-up questions that are obvious to anybody who gives a close read of these things. But in June, they said that they were a minority shareholder of this new USFL. Now they said they control the USFL. And I learned through subsequent pestering of them what that means exactly. They own the new USFL outright. That is, Fox Sports owns 100% of this new USFL. So I got to figure out what happened between June and now that changed it. And I wish I knew more to come on your show, but I can't make people answer questions, I guess, at least not without a subpoena. And I've been assured that all of this will be cleared up in due course. But that was the main thing, that Fox went from being sort of a player in this to being the player. And you see that in who's running things. Eric Shanks is going to be chairman of the USFL board of directors, and he's the top guy in Fox Sports. Everything revolves around him. So, to what extent that's ceremonial or a practical day-to-day thing, they're putting chairman level control at the very top of Fox Sports too, with the USFL.
I find this fascinating for just how you're talking about it, because it is they are revealing details, but this is really coming down to the wire with even just stuff that they are putting together. I mean, even for example, now we've known about this. You mentioned it in your initial write-up on it before they dropped the press release. That Birmingham has been negotiated as the site right now for playing these games. Now the press release doesn't mention that, but that's for some reason people have had some doubts. My understanding, if I had to take a guess, and clarify me if you will, is that they haven't finalized it, so they couldn't really announce it in that press release. Is that an understandable kind of way to put it?
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. I mean, once something gets into these press releases, they only go there if they're completely locked in and buttoned up. And I'm sure the reporting in Birmingham that came through just watching the public sector and the public ownership of the stadium is correct, that they are heading down that path toward playing all their games in Birmingham. Clearly, it's just not completely locked up, so they wouldn't commit to that officially. I don't know anything personally about that, to be clear. That was local reporting out of Birmingham. But, I'm sure that, when they sort of say, Ben, I understand that you've got a lot of questions about this that we're not ready to answer yet, but we'll talk to you soon about that. I would imagine the venue has got to be part of that, because, honestly, if we're starting in April and we don't know the names of the teams or where they're playing or who the coaches are, forgive me for being skeptical that this is actually going to happen.
Right.
So, I'm sort of in my mind balancing that versus the fact that Fox Sports is a pretty reputable brand, and Eric Shanks is a serious person who is taken very seriously at the highest levels of the sports industry. So on one hand, I have my doubts that this is real. It seems hard to believe that we're going to have a new league up and running in April when we don't even know what the team names are, or who the coaches are, or how the players are going to be allocated. But, Fox Sports has sort of earned the benefit of the doubt a little bit too. So I guess I'm stuck between those two things.
Right. And I know you mentioned you don't really know the in-between from, say, June to now, but the fact that there's coming out in this release and saying we outright are running this is our thing now. The big what if thing with this when it was originally announced in June was, okay, Fox is part of it, but Brian Woods being involved really put a lot of a damper on a lot of enthusiasts, especially original USFL fans, on the fact that, okay, his reputation with the TSL and especially the Fall Experimental Football League, that's worrisome. Now, I'm going to put it on my own notes here and say that at this point, they kind of added him in to be the operations guy because he brought the idea to the table and is being surrounded by folks at Fox to say, we're running this. You brought the idea. We'll let you run it, but we're going to have a lot of checks and balances here because we know what this is like and we can't mess this up. And the crunch time, I imagine, just adds on to it. I know you can't add too much of that, but it seems like that's what's being implied with this board setup as well.
Yeah, I think that's not an unfair perspective on things, that they clearly think Brian would bring something to the table. But make no mistake, this is not a Brian Woods Fox Sports Jam. This is a Fox Sports Jam where Brian Woods is a senior hire. So yeah, I mean, I understand his reputational questions coming from the prior things. So I have not reported a lot of those myself, so I guess I couldn't really speak to it, but I know they exist. The argument I'm sure from Fox would be, yeah, he's there. He's got some experience in spring football or secondary non-NFL pro football, if you will, and that's worth a lot. But we got Daryl Johnston and Mike Pereira and Edward Hartman, who kind of be the adults in the room at the same time. So whether that works out or not, I don't know. It takes a lot more than 4 smart people to put a football league together from scratch. But, there's a nice blend there of experience doing this plus just heavy hitters who can get phone calls answered and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And funny, Johnston seems like he's pretty confident in this. So he's gone on the record, even co-tweeting your own write-up on this release, kind of pinning a doubter on there saying, hey, this is legitimate. The business people behind this are, going to put out a good product. And he's obviously been through the ringer himself. He was in the Alliance American Football.
Sure.
That's another confidence piece to me, is that the man knows how things can get messed up pretty fast. So Fox is bringing in someone that, has not only worked with their organization, but has worked in the business side of, seeing something collapse and can be like, here's something you can't do on these pieces here. And then, of course, Mike Pierre is a very responsible and well represented officiating member in the football community too.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one other thing that's worth mentioning about these guys is he's not a big name, but Edward Hartman, the guy who works for Fox Sports, EVP of Business Operations, he just recently came over from Fox Corporation into Fox Sports. I forget what his title is, but here, let me look it up. But it's something like gaming and let me see here. Okay, he's SVP of Digital Partnerships and Wagering at Fox Sports. So, I'd say that something like that in this environment is a useful mind to have, because in my experience, when you've got pure football operators in these startup football leagues, I don't mean to be hostile or denigrate them, but they're so concerned about just like the blocking and tackling of like the equipment bus, getting the equipment bus to games, and those little details that are important, but you want to have somebody who's got a broader view of things. And someone like Hartman, he can sort of take a step back and say, yeah, we're running a football league, but also we can't just be lighting money on fire. We've got to find a way to do this sustainably. And also he can look for creative ways to monetize it. I'm sure sports betting will be a big part of this in ways the NFL maybe is not comfortable in yet. And he can really put the pedal down and maximize those revenue streams. That could be a real game changer for this league too. So I think that his path coming out of this wagering job, or I guess he'll have both jobs. He'll be this EVP of the league, but also still be this digital partnerships and sports betting thing at Fox. You can expect to see a lot of that. And hey, if they can have a major revenue stream out of sports betting in some way that none of these other failed spring leagues have ever had before, that could be a game changer.
Right. Well, and they're trying to get out of the gate here early. The big looming XFL type of competition is coming in a year from what we understand. And obviously they're seeing an opportunity. The bubble concept they tested last year as well. And the wagering, it's funny, they're kind of pulling that as like seeing, to me, how the XFL did it so well with putting, the numbers on the spreads, the over-unders on their broadcasts and trying to promote that. And now that it's exploded, someone like you're talking like a Hartman who is kind of in that position and is able to push that and maximize that potential. I imagine that's going to be revealed at some point. Again, to me, talking to you more and more, it's like, okay, like, hey, we got to get some more details here pretty soon. Like, it is November at this point, and vaguely middle April is what we're talking right now as a start.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you could argue that I am being way too charitable to them and sort of filling in the gaps, because they have not said any of this. There's not been a sit-down interview. There's been basically 2 press releases, one in June and one now. And, I'm probably giving them the benefit of the doubt that they are not just building up a paper tiger, and it's not just a house of cards. It's never actually going to get off the ground. Maybe I should be. I guess I'm engaging in this conversation for the sake of argument that if it does succeed, this is what they're thinking. But,
right.
The lack of more thorough disclosure and being able to sit down with someone who's at the top level of the decision making and go through it in detail and press them on these parts. I don't think the absence of that is necessarily reason to doubt it. It's just, I don't think they still need to earn some credibility here, just because it's amazing how fast 4 months will go by. And December, January, February, March. Yeah, I mean, they got to be putting teams together. You can't build a football league, so they got the clock is ticking for sure for more answers.
I will say quality. That's my concern with a speedy kind of a construction like they're doing. I actually want to ask you, this is kind of me asking the question yourself. Have you heard of the European League of Football in any way?
Yeah, I'm trying to, why do I know that? I did an interview with somebody in the UK who was trying to build up a UK American Football League. And I think,
okay.
I think the European Football League, I think maybe he had some experience there before. So it rings a bell. I couldn't tell you much about it, but anyway, that's
okay.
Yeah, I know it exists, but
I bring it up because they did a similar turnaround like this last year where it was in 6 months. They announced it and apparently put a product out in April. Now credit, the USFL's had a little longer runway, but to me at this point, if I'm looking at last year's kind of developments with them, I'm expecting that, I hope, and again, this is us putting words in mouth, but I'm expecting myself, December, late November's got to be kind of a mad dash, because that's how it was for that league as well, for the ELF. I mean, you said that I'm kind of prying here with this, but you said that they were going to answer questions further down the line. Was any of that inflection maybe that further down the lines in the next few weeks, or that it's we're right about to do this soon,
Well,
I know I'm prying a little bit, so
no, it's okay. If I had good answers, I would have printed those in my story. But as I was sort of going back to them and saying, okay, this is good, this is useful information, but it's very incomplete. Their response has been, patience, more is coming very soon. Okay. So I don't know what very soon is. In my experience as a journalist, soon is not necessarily an executive or a lawyer soon. So I don't know if that means the next few days or the next few weeks, or the next couple of months. But I think they understand that it'll be hard to take this too seriously until they start disclosing more details. I think they understand there's a certain sense of urgency about that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Time's not exactly on their side, and public opinion has to be starting to move in that direction. You need to start getting the media machine rolling a little bit more, which they finally started doing something. I mean, was kind of surprised when they retooled their Twitter, mind you, because they moved to a whole new account, and then they finally got a Facebook that's in order and an Instagram, and that's just like just of yesterday. These are moves that to me you make back in June and more concretely in June. I know there's details missing, but it just, to me and others, it just kind of is fathoming that now we're seeing these things all of a sudden pop up. Fox, I feel like, would be ahead of this at that point, though.
Yeah, I agree with you that those sort of just basic table stakes to any sort of sports league or any sort of entertainment property in 2021 is a really nice Twitter and social and all of social media sites presence, and just to have sort of that communications infrastructure up and running. I mean, that was one of the things the new XFL 2.0 did so well. I mean, they were just so smart and ambitious and creative in a social way. On the other hand, we can make a case that the problem for all of these startup spring secondary football leagues is cost control.
Yeah.
That we all love football, but unless you're already a billionaire who owns an NFL team, it's prohibitively expensive to run football teams. So maybe, again, this is me sort of giving this new USFL more benefit of the doubt than they frankly earned.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they figured out one way to get to a second season or a third season is don't have a multi-million-dollar social media team and put all of the limited resources into the game itself and the broadcast itself. And while that stuff is nice, you can make a case that, maybe Vince McMahon was gold plating the XFL 2.0, and then the pandemic hit and suddenly money was tight. And he's wondering, these are world-class social media guys, but why do we have 30 of them? So, I mean, maybe what we see as weaknesses in the USFL not having these things up and running is just Fox saying, okay, we can do this, but we got to do it cheap.
Sure.
That's the only way it's going to work. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they're just late, but, maybe they're just trying to do it differently and to save money.
Right. Well, we've scoffed at those that have been following like the XFL and even the AAF. We've scoffed at the fact that Fox kind of put out earlier this year, we're going to commit $100 to $150 million, which, to any other Joe Schmo out there, it's like, oh, that's a good chunk of money. But then you're like, anyone that's followed these alternative leagues are going, oh my God, that's that kind of covers some things, but you're not going to be able to run like XFL levels of, stuff unless you cut back. But, one site, you figure that kind of is how that would work. It's not future plans, I put in quotations, is the idea for moving to markets. That's how this is playing out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got one stadium deal instead of 8 or whatever. Sure. That's one quick way to really cut down on your costs. You keep everybody in one place, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe they are trying to take a more lean approach to it and just, I've covered a lot of startup leagues. I used to cover the Olympics, and Olympic sports are always trying to build up professional leagues. And they say, boy, if we can only get 1/30th of the attention that volleyball gets during the Olympics for our little volleyball league, we'll be fine. But that's actually really hard to do outside of that context. And a lot of them are just like, success is just having a second season. And it's amazing how many startup leagues can't even get to that point. And, maybe the USFL isn't all that buttoned up, and maybe it's all at one stadium, and maybe things aren't as nice as we expect them. But if that allows them to finish a year and not be $100 million in the hole or whatever and go to bankruptcy, then maybe over the long term, that's the right way to do it. But for the moment, that really translates into us having lots of good questions and they're not quite having enough answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Holding a lot of stuff close to the vest. That's also what it's kind of been. I don't know. I mean, I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm kind of like you right now, where I'm also giving them a lot of the benefit of the doubt, even though, like you're saying, it's a lot of information and a lot of questions. We're all going, what's going on? And then, of course, it's a weird, on my angle, it's a weird social interaction when you have folks that grew up in the old USFL era and they saw Heisman Trophy winners play and, future MVPs and Hall of Famers. And then we're seeing this build up, and you have going, oh, some people going, they're tarnishing the old name, or, they're going to cheapen it because, the small budget, there's no way they'll get those Hall of Fame players out there, but they're still using that, very much nostalgic and still brand heavy name. Surprisingly. I mean, that was what the second part surprised me with this was when they announced it coming back, I went, okay, I never thought that would happen. But the response from people in terms of saying they can't do this, this is like my thing I grew up with. They're going to take a legacy of something that was kind of, cult, but special, and tarnish it. And that's what's hanging over this right now too, I've noticed.
Yeah, I don't know how the intellectual property question in the old USFL brand plays out, because you're right. People have really strong feelings about that, and really great / almost just sort of strange memories about, you're right, Heisman Trophy winners and big names and how explosive it was. But then it collapsed, very spectacularly. And, the involvement of Donald Trump in the history of it adds a new layer to it all. And I think, to me, that means, hey, we don't have to get people used to new names. There's going to be a certain amount of people who watch this just because the names will ring a bell to them. I'd say for a startup league, that's probably on whole a positive. But you're right. If it turns out to be, if it's noticeable that they're trying to do it on the cheap, or that it is sort of like slapped together, then that's going to be a downside to it too. But on the whole, I think it's clearly better for them. They don't have to invest in trying to create a new name. I mean, remember the XFL had like a 1.5 year long process to name the team,
right?
And like, it was cool, but also with the benefit of hindsight, again, maybe that was time and energy that was better spent elsewhere. So that's one thing that allows the USFL to kind of put this together in short order, is that they've kind of already got this intellectual property they're working with. And there's some downsides to that for sure.
Sure thing. And all that. And for those knowing, in this release, now that's under the NSFL holding company that Fox owns, National Spring Football League, as part of that arrangement, kind of its own separate subsection, if you will, to help run that league under Fox too. Ben, I want to say thank you very much for joining into the show. Before we go, I have one final kind of question, because you've been bringing up, like, you have things you want answered, coming through here. So, just to lay it out there, what are I have my own list, but what are your list of priority questions, like when the next go around is to go talk to those at Fox or those that are releasing to the press? Like, what are your top 3 things you need to know, like then and there, next time they come to talk to you?
Yeah, I think that most of my outstanding questions just revolve around what changed between the June minority stake line and now I'll own it outright. And also, maybe this is the same question phrased slightly differently. What is the actual relationship between the Spring League and the new USFL? Because if I had to guess, I'd say there's some sort of joint venture here where Fox and the Spring League came together to create this new USFL. But again, that is a guess, and I don't actually know that. And I think it would make a lot of things would fall together if we just sort of said, okay, what actually got us to this point from a business standpoint? So those are probably my first through 5 questions, if I had them in a room and they promised to answer everything.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing any follow-ups that you or Sports Business Journal have. Also, by the way, really been appreciative of you guys updating us on the St. Louis versus NFL court cases. Those have been, I think that whole saga is entertaining right now, at least in terms of, like, I've never been more entertained in a court discussion before in my life, but just seeing how that seems to be, I guess, unfolding is fascinating, and a lot of implications down the line. So thank you guys for covering that, and just your other coverage and keeping us informed on, like, other things like XFL related too. You guys have been at the forefront of it, and I know you've been in part of those articles as well. So I appreciate that.
Sure thing. Hey, that's what they pay me to do. So I'm hoping doing it well. And the St. Louis lawsuit, it's amazing it's gotten to this point. There's no bigger story in the NFL. So I should just move to St. Louis and do that for the next few months, honestly. But you got other things going on too. I've still got a Super Bowl prep story to write too. So we'll try to be everywhere at once. But I'm glad to hear people reading the St. Louis thing, because that is just bizarre. That's a whole other podcast for sure.
Oh yeah, I could actually, I definitely would. I would mind having you on for an NFL related one on that if we get that chance. Yeah. Either Battle Hawks, NFL expansion, something's going to happen in that town. It seems money, a lot of question marks. But really, I thank you guys. Pass that along to your folks over there, because we really enjoy it, especially in our alternative communities too. Where can we follow you on social media? Where should we look for Sports Business Journal as well, or just yourself?
I'm at Ben Fischer SBJ. Fischer, that's got the C in there. And
Okay.
then the SBJ is SBJ SBD is the Twitter handle there. And we're on every social media, but I'd say Twitter is the best place to follow us for minute-to-minute news.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We look forward to hearing from you, and wish you best on your quest to get some more details, because I know many of us will be doing the similar way. But thank you for providing what you know. Appreciate our conversation. Good to talk to you.
All right. Anytime. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
The Gridiron Gallery podcast. New episodes every Friday on your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and premiering first, as always, at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, only on unhingedsn.com.